3,000. Big. 31 target north, boom stack 36,000, 13,000. Bang. 40 scope, short skate, hot, right.
This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one.
All right, now that we've got the uncomfortable silence and the meaningful eye contact out of the way, does everybody feel really uncomfortable now? Happy Saturday morning to everybody. Welcome back to the Be One Change One podcast. This one's going to be a little bit special. We invited a Marine onto an Air Force show, and I just found out that we've been debating the finer points of why Alabama is better than Auburn. So it could be an interesting conversation. You guys need to stay tuned for the next 60 to 90 minutes. Welcome, Mike Jernigan.
Welcome,
Thanks,
Mike.
Roscoe. I appreciate that. Thanks, Cass. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I'll go with the bio if you guys are ready.
Yeah.
So Mike is a retired.
I do need. Can I?
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, Cass. I just
go ahead.
Roscoe and I are both from Alabama, and so it does. I can't really let it go by. I did notice his hat, and I was just wondering if your podcast listeners knew the difference between the Atlanta Braves A and the University of Alabama A.
Probably not. Our listeners are smarter than me, but
Explain.
I will tell you, and you can look at his cover right now and tell. But the Alabama A has a mullet.
Well, we earned it.
It's fair.
Yeah,
point.
you did. It's
fair
fitting.
Point. So with that's my last representation for the allegiance that I have in the state that Roscoe and I both have.
Okay.
Some family that come to. So with Cass, I will. Sorry for the interruption. I'll give it back to you. But I think we set the tone.
We'll call a truce for the next hour or so. How's that?
Fair point.
All right, go Cass.
Go Hawks. Okay, Mike's a retired colonel who possesses an extensive 30 years worth of experience as a highly skilled United States Marine. Throughout his career, he successfully commanded 2 battalions during combat operations and also served as the commanding officer of the prestigious Marine Corps Engineer School. His exceptional leadership abilities were further showcased in his role as the Engineer and Explosive Ordnance Disposal Branch Head at Headquarters Marine Corps, where he played a pivotal role in shaping the strategic direction of 1/4 of the entire U.S. military. Additionally, he served as the Director of Installations and Logistics for U.S. Forces Japan, overseeing critical operations and logistics functions. Notably, he also served as the Chief of Staff for the organization responsible for managing 1/3 of the Marine Corps' worldwide bases. Mike's academic achievements are equally impressive, unless you ask Roscoe. He holds degrees from Auburn University, the Naval Postgraduate School, and Pakistan's National Defense University. Moreover, he has successfully completed the Chief of Staff certification program at Oxford University, further enhancing his knowledge and expertise. Presently, Mike serves as the esteemed director of the mentorship program for the Chief of Staff Association. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, Cass, thank you for that kind introduction. Roscoe, thank you. Before we get started, I do want to, in all seriousness, appreciate both of you lads and your communities in the F-15s and the F-16s. Thank you for protecting and flying Overwatch. Your lads and teammates have protected a lot of guys like me and guys that look like me and guys that I was with. And in the pre-show, we figured out that we really haven't exactly crossed where your aircraft dropped for me, but your squadrons did and your teammates did. And so I want to say thank you for taking care of America's most precious possessions and flying Overwatch for little green crunchies on the ground. So thank you.
You're welcome, brother.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, it's like I used to always say, remember when we were at Paycom together, Mike, and I was still going through McMap? And all the Marines would give me the look because who's this Air Force kid? And I used to just tell him, I used to go, dude, I'll tell you what, man, every time I was in Iraq or anywhere downrange, you guys were always the ones screaming the loudest. So here I am.
Fair point.
Yeah.
I mean, true. Everybody needs loud friends on the battlefield.
Yeah.
We used to have in our life support locker room, I guess you would call it, on the door that goes out to go across to the ops desk before we could get our keys to our jet and whatnot. The last thing that we saw on the back of the door was a big old sticker that said, "The mission is an 18-year-old with a rifle." And then you go over to then you go over to the ops desk, and we get what tail number we're in, we get our step brief and everything, and we go to walk out the ops room door out onto the flight line, and the last thing that we see was a big old sticker on that door that says, "Danger close, don't fucking miss." So thank
you for that. By the way,
I say that because I just want you to know that I mean we were solely focused on protecting and helping you guys and the ground force commanders achieve their objectives. And oftentimes that came in the form of guys screaming on the other end of the radio and us trying to dampen that situation and keep things calm and put an end to the skirmish so that you guys could get back to chow that night and call your wives.
Yeah.
I need to tell you thank you. That for your listeners, one of the best things about fighter pilots in the American military is that calm, cool, collected on the radio. I have been standing next to that guy screaming on the radio and hitting him to go faster with a rolled up whatever I could have in my hand. And the voice always came back like an FM DJ in the Midwest. Roger, Pono 6, on your position. We'll be dropping in 3, 2, and then it was great. I mean, so it's a good teamwork. I do think that's one of the great things about the American military is that we have a different culture between our different services, and that's a culture for a reason. And we kid each other. Like we were talking about Auburn, Alabama, and we kid each other. But the fact of it is that it's truly we're all in for the good of America and the good of taking care of our teammates. And so I absolutely love that. It's such a privilege to me to get to talk to you guys, particularly you, Roscoe, to make the connection that your squadron has dropped for me before. You didn't. We kind of worked that out in the pregame, but I'm familiar with your squadron's call sign. And I think that's one of the great things about the American military is that, there's people all over the world that are like, oh, Roscoe, I need to find that guy and buy him a beer because I heard his voice on the radio one day in a bad day.
Yeah, we've actually run into that, and on a few different occasions, you might be standing in the line for chow a few days later with a bunch of guys with really dirty, nasty ACUs, and they turn around and go, "Hey, man, were you flying like 3 days ago?" "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was." And they come up and shake your hand, and it's a little bit humbling, and you. It's hard to not be really proud, and we do a lot. We talk a lot about ego and bravado and things like that. It's hard to dampen that a lot because it's almost, in some respects, it's almost a little bit of a celebrity status sometimes. Yeah. But it's also humbling at the same time because you're standing there with guys, and I mean, our job really wasn't that hard flying around. We're safe from any real danger up there, barring something catastrophic going on with the aircraft, but we're not in harm's way, and you guys on the ground were really paying you guys were paying the price for it, and we were kind of, I hate to say it, but we got accolades for things that maybe we shouldn't have. I got medals for stuff that I'm like, whatever, dude, and
yeah, we were just doing our job.
Exactly, and that's kind of the way we looked at it, and then back to the comms piece of it, I just wanted to say that that's something that we train really, really hard. We had what we called the 5 C's of communication, and it was clear, concise, and correct. And then the other 2 that people really kind of got lost on or forgot about was calm and cool. You can't scream into the radio like some drunk hillbilly singing in the shower. You got to keep things cool. And I like that Midwest DJ analogy that you used, like Paul Harvey cool, man. Just dampen the situation, let them know that everything's going to be okay, and you're working through the processes to save his butt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we always stress too, just so you know, Mike, like don't rush to failure because we show up on scene and you guys have been engaged in something for a while, and what you're seeing on the ground is very different than what we're seeing in the air. And before you let something go off the jet, especially in a danger close scenario, which for the listeners who don't know, danger close just means that the blue friendlies are inside the frag pattern of the bomb, basically. You have to know that you've got everything doped out on the ground and you're not dropping on the east side of the road when you need to be dropping on the west side of the road, and you really have to get all that stuff spelled out first. So that's why too, we always try to add a little bit of, okay, everybody take a breath. We got to figure this out real quick. and get everybody in a situation where we could get the information that we needed so we could make it happen for you guys. So, but it's intentional,
team.
Like Roscoe was saying.
Yeah, and you do it well. And Roscoe, to your point, there's a good ego that comes with being a professional in a professional business. And then there's the bad part of the ego that gets that the name on the back of the jersey is more important than the name on the front of the jersey. And we all know people like that. But it's that professional ego of that I've got a difficult job to do. And like you were saying, Cass, let's take a minute and reset, because if Mike's on the ground calling and he's calling for danger close, let's make sure we give it to him what he needs. And so I appreciate you both and the thousands of Americans that you represent.
Thanks, brother. We appreciate you too.
Yeah, thanks, man. Well, you know what? While we're on it, I want to stay on ego just for a second, Cass, if that's okay. I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit. By the way, Mike, I don't know how to interview people, so I don't do things linearly. So if you were looking to come in here with some chronological story, sorry, I'm going to burst your bubble a little bit. Speaking of ego, we've talked about that quite a bit. In fact, we were just talking about it a couple of days ago when we were taping a show, and we talked about the good side and the bad side of ego and how that can be it can be a motivator for competition, and how competition isn't always bad. Sometimes it is, but looking back through your career, you're an accomplished guy. I mean, you don't get to be an 06 in the Marines by sucking at what you do, and probably being out front of the majority of your peers. So give us some examples maybe of how that happened in your career throughout the decades, and how that ego helped and maybe even hurt in some places.
Thanks, Roscoe. That's such a great question. How ego helped and how ego hurt. We'll come to how the ego hurt. I've spent some time thinking about that. And I definitely earned some of my mistakes. But coming to how the ego helped, one of the things that I did, like being a fighter pilot, the Marine Corps is a community that considers itself elite. My wife calls it an institutional arrogance. I like that phrasing, and it's a bit humorous, but it's really a little bit true. And like, the Rangers in the Army, certainly the fighter pilot community, the Marines, everybody kind of comes in with an institutional put on you that you have to be good enough to be on the team. You have to be good enough to stay on the team, and you have to be better than good enough to get promoted on the team. And so all of us professionally grow up like many people do. We have to do the best we can, and we try the hardest we can. And so that's one of the things that I always kind of decided as a new Marine and prior to getting commissioned, is that I'm going to work as hard as I can. And that's the only thing I can control. I am going to be the hardest worker. If Cass is going to be the hardest worker in the squadron, it's because he's working harder than me. But he's working harder than me because he has more capacity, not because I'm slacking off. And one of the things that helped me do as a young lieutenant, as a captain, as a major, and as a lieutenant colonel, and even as a colonel, is I tried to do the best I could. I tried to find training. I tried to ask people who had been there. I tried to have, kind of like in our warm-up get together, I had lots of conversations with fighter pilots before we were in a war to find out about their world. It's like, what kind of information can I give you to help your job be easier so you can make the bad guys go away, because I'm having a bad day. And so that is the good side of the ego of saying, I'm going to be as good as I possibly can, and I'm going to work as hard as I can. Now, where the negative side of the ego comes in this part of my story, I avoided it. Later, the part of my story, which I'll share, I did not avoid it to my own detriment. But the good side, the bad side of the ego is we get people who get to be professionally competent at their job. You mentioned getting some medals, we get accolades, and then all of a sudden you think it's what I'm doing and not what the team's doing. And then all of a sudden you think that I am, don't believe your own performance appraisals. That's, I think, one of the things that I would go back and tell young Mike Jernigan is just because your boss says he's good, he's not talking to you. He's talking to some promotion committee in the future, or some command selection committee, or some assignments guy. So don't believe what's in your performance appraisal. And I don't care if you're working in accounting, or you're working for Staples, or if you're a United States Marine. And so what happened to me is I had a series of trying to work the hardest. I'm not going to be the fastest. I'm not going to be the strongest. I'm not going to be the tallest. I'm not going to be a superlative. But all I can do is I can work the hardest, and I try to be kind and optimistic. I try to smile and encourage people. That's part of my character. So between helping people get better because I'm bent that way, and between working as hard as I can, that led to now the team is working as hard as it can. And so I had a series of teams that got to be better and better. Both of the battalions I commanded won best in class awards. That is not me. That is the team. But early Mike Jernigan thought that it was me. And fortunately, those accolades came later when I kind of came to that. But I'm a strong and handsome man, and doggone it, I want to be tall. I'm not tall, but I want to be tall. And so that negative ego, I've seen people get tripped up by that. You're a brilliant young in your profession, and then you get moved up to the mid part of the profession, and you're brilliant, and you think that the brilliant's going to keep coming, and then you run into your own ego getting in the way. So bottom line at the bottom, I would say that an ego of being a professional and knowing you're good at your job, like you guys were telling me, is that we work really hard to be calm and collected on the radio. Okay. You worked really hard at that, but that's what we call your job. That's the price of admission. And so there's value for being good at it. For guys like me that are on the other end, I'm not calm. I'm really trying not to raise my voice, but right now means right now, please. And so there's a difference in understanding that you're a competent professional rather than I'm the best thing and insert whatever we do. But, I'm a supply chain manager. I'm the best supply chain manager because I just got this award from the Home Depot that says I'm the best supply chain manager. So let me pause there and see what that stimulates in your questions and thinking, please.
No, that was great, Mike, because those are the things that we talk about. I mean, ego can play a role in having some self-confidence and being able to, move into what can be difficult or hard situations and try to perform to the best level that you can. But the downside of that is when it becomes self-absorption, right? When it becomes, okay, it's not about the team anymore. It's about me. And I'm the one that's so good at this. And all of this is happening because I did it. And now you start to cut people out. You don't give credit where credit belongs, right? And that's where it becomes really divisive and erosive over time. And so that's what we try to talk about, and we talked about this other day, and I've shared this with you before too. My approach was always humble, approachable, credible. I didn't always do it well. I can think of a few times with a few individuals in particular as a weapons officer where I was the asshole patch. And I'd take those things back if I could. It starts with, there's a reason that humility's first, right? Because humility is what keeps that in check, right? And so in that humility allows that approachability and lends to credibility. Because if you're the guy that's always beating his chest but can never be wrong, that ego is not serving you anymore, right? Because we all make mistakes and we have to admit those mistakes because admitting mistakes also lends to credibility. And so, no, that was a great discussion on that. And I really appreciate your viewpoint. I wanted to ask you though, because when we were together at Paycom, I know you faced a lot of adversity and, you read your bio and you'd never know it, but, you faced a lot of adversity when we were together at Pacific Command. And I'd like you to talk about that story a little bit, because one of the things that I always appreciated about you when that went down, because I know it was, that first couple of weeks, especially, man, it was pretty deflating. That was a hard pill to swallow. But what I always appreciated about you, and we've talked about this too, is, dude, you showed up like nobody I've ever seen before in your integrity. And even though you got some really bad news, you continued to walk in your values and show up every day and just do you. And I thought that was awesome. So tell us a little bit about that and why you made the decisions you made.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's a bit emotional. So let me just take a second and kind of gather my breathing. And for your listeners, the U.S. military rightfully has an up or out policy. Between the Spanish-American War and World War I, and then again between World War I and World War II, we had some real challenges that the American military leaders, including all of our most senior generals, were good old boys who had just been in the system long enough. And General Winfred Scott was in his 80s when the war of World War I started, and he was not well suited to be a combatant commander anymore. He had done great things in the Spanish-American War. He had done great things, but in the Civil War, that's how far back it goes. But he got older and he wasn't well suited, and so the military went through a series of revisions, starting with that. And now for all of the ranks in the military, from the youngest to the oldest, you get 2 chances to get promoted to the next rank. And after 2 chances, you have to get out. And there are some gates for different things that once you've been invested for enough in the company, in the organization, there are some gates that will get you to the next career milestone, or in many cases to enable you to get to a 20-year pension. And so all the ranks have a different amount of time. But the reality of it is that everybody gets 2 chances to get picked, because there's people younger than you that are coming up. And like we did at the start of World War I and the start of World War II, we really can't afford to have people sucking up the oxygen and taking all of the promotion slots, because that's the other side of it, is if you keep a whole bunch of people, then you can't keep the good ones. Now, there's a different conversation of whether we should be forcing people out of the Marine Corps or the Air Force or the Army or the Navy because they're good at their job. But the fact of it is, it's a competitive process. Everything's competitive, and you got to fit through the screen. And then I didn't fit through the screen. CAS and I were working together, and I had been up for promotion to colonel for the first time, and they didn't pick me. And to put it in a little bit of context is that I was completely flabbergasted. I was completely blindsided. I was completely,
everybody was,
walking through. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, everybody was, man. Even Colonel A was. Part
of that is because we were also blindsided, is that I had done what the system said I needed to do. I had been a successful battalion commander. I had gone to the top level school. I had done all of the difficult assignments, and I had all the performance appraisals that says I was a strong and handsome American. And what happened is those people in that in that category, there was a 95% selection rate from lieutenant colonel to colonel, because I had already gone through about 5 different screening gates. And so with a 95% selection rate, and I was not selected, one thing that the Marine Corps does pretty well, I don't know about the other services, is that we have a senior officer look you in the eye and tell you when you haven't made the team. It's hard for him, and it's hard for me and the guy on the other end. And I've had to do that on the other end also. But it's personal and it's real. And so I can remember a colonel telling me, as a lieutenant colonel, "I'm really sorry to tell you, you didn't get picked." And I thought this was some kind of joke. And he pulled out the paper with a list of everybody's names, and here's the list, and my name's not on it. And you guys frozen? Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, yeah. Good. And so, and then I said, well, that's. I was trying to measure it and figure out what to do with it. And then he pulls out the other list. He goes, "Here's the list of people that are eligible who were not selected, and my name is on the dean's other list." And I can remember telling him, I said, "Wow." I gave the same statistic that I just gave you, and I said, "I've never thought of myself in the bottom 5% before, and now I have tangible evidence that I am not in the 95%. I am in the bottom 5%." And so that's how I got the news, and that's what I started with. And a couple things happened. It was a hard day. It still is hard. The end of the story is I got picked up the next year. I got 8 years as a colonel. I got 31 years in the Marine Corps. We can talk about that story, but I don't know how the story ends. This could be the end of my Marine Corps time. And so I had a decision, and there were 2 choices that I could do. And the first choice is, do I quit training, quit working hard, or do I continue to work hard? And I decided that I was going to continue to work hard. The only thing that, I told you earlier that in the Marine Corps, I just want to be the hardest working that I can. It's okay if Roscoe works harder than me, but Mike is going to work as hard as he can. And so I decided to continue to work hard. The second choice that I had, and the only thing that I can control, is working hard and my attitude. And I had seen people get passed over before. I never thought it would be me. It was me. I've had to cancel people getting passed over since then. And I decided I had a choice. I had a good attitude or a bad attitude. And what I mean by that is, if with a bad attitude, I could frassa, and the Marine Corps down, and they don't know, and I'm really good, and I just don't like these people, and I'm gonna talk bad about them, and or I could decide to have a good attitude. And what I decided that I could control, and it didn't come easy. It wasn't like roses and ponies, but it came very difficultly. But I decided that there's a panel of how many ever people, there's a process, there's a screen. For whatever reason, I didn't fit through it. I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to have a good attitude. I decided, and I was expecting to get out of the Marine Corps. You get one more chance, but the 5% is reduced. Is if you don't miss it the first time, particularly for colonel in the Marines, we only have 621 colonels in the whole Marine Corps. We pick, maybe 30 or 40 a year. And so if you are passed out the first time because you're in the bottom 5% for whatever reason, then, there's a less than 5 or 3% the next time that you come back. So my graph of being, 95% that I thought, and then being selected in the bottom 5% because I didn't get screened, also means that now you're starting at the bottom 5% for your last chance. And so I had gone to the retirement classes. I had done the things that are required. But like Cass noted, every day I showed up at work, and after, I didn't go back to work the afternoon that they told me that. And the next morning or the next day, I went in and I told my boss, and I told Cass and our team. And then what was really interesting to me is that for most of the next year, I learned that if you don't get picked up for promotion in the Marine Corps, you're a little bit like a leper. Everybody is like, what happened to him? He's unclean. And Cass never did this, and our boss never did this. But there's lots of people that on one level I thought were my friends, and then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, I don't want to talk to that guy because whatever he's got, I don't want to catch that. And so that, when I say having a good attitude, that was a daily thing. That wasn't just I wake up one morning and say, okay, here we go. It was like every day I'd go to work and there would be new email or a new phone call or a new something, meeting somebody in the hallway, and they go, what happened, man? Why did you not get passed over? Why did you not get picked for selection? And I was like, I don't know. The answer that I would give people, it was that there were people that were more qualified than me. And that's the truth. There were people that were more qualified for me. I don't know the reasons why I wasn't on that qualified list. And that kind of helped me to take it away from it's all about me, is that there was a process, whatever it was. I don't like the outcome of the process, but there was a process, and I didn't fit through the screen. And so let me pause there, Cass, and see what that stimulates in your thinking.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, yeah, so many things that you just said in your response there comes right back to the things that we talk about on the Be One Change One podcast. And we talk about attitude and how your attitude can carry you through some of these harder times, and the resiliency that you get on the back end. And we were just talking a couple of days ago about how important having a positive mental attitude is, and deflecting the negative things in your life, and stop being a freaking victim all the time, and look at it instead of going, why did this happen to me? Sit down and annotate, well, what can I learn from this? What lesson is life trying to teach me through this? And maybe in some respects, life was trying to teach you the lesson of humility, or looking on a positive side. And what I'm really interested though in is go all the way back to that day when your commanding officer told you that you weren't selected. We haven't really deep dived, Cass, into the grieving process and how you have to go through that. And there's different steps. There's anger. And I mean, there's all these different steps through the grieving process until you get to the end where it's acceptance. And then you apply that. But going through that grieving process for you in that in that moment or that day or that week or month or however long it took you to get through that. I want to see if we can tie that into the end game, where it sounds like to me that your values and what was important to you and your personal integrity and what you value in life is what really propelled you forward. But there's that gap in the middle there where that grieving process happens.
Yeah.
And so you're notified. He tells you, you don't believe, you got a little bit of that disbelief for a second. You're like, no way. And then he shows you the numbers don't lie. And you're like, well, crap. And then you go through the anger and the resentment and the questioning and finally to the acceptance. So tell us a little bit more about how that went through your mind, and maybe even who supported you through that. Who are your champions through that process? Your wife, no doubt, she's got your back all the time, but instead of being the leper, who are the guys and gals in your corner that were helping you through that?
Yeah, thanks, Roscoe. That's a really good question. Let me unpack that a little bit. Part of what I did is the guy, the senior officer that told me I passed. He told me, don't go back to work today. I found out like just after lunch, and so he forced me to go home. And then I had a decision, and he said, don't come to work tomorrow. And I kind of had the decision if I'm going to just pull the covers over my head or get up and go to work. The afternoon helped me. I told my wife. She was startled. I didn't tell my kids for a couple of days because they were smaller. I don't remember exactly their ages, but 12 and 10.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Not teenagers. And so my wife and I kind of processed that afternoon. And then in the morning, I went out and I worked out like I always did. And then I made a decision. Am I going to just sit at home or am I going to go to work? And they gave me the day off, and that never happens. And then I said, what am I going to do if I go? I already worked out. What if I don't go to work? And I think that was the first decision that I made unconsciously that really helped me, was that I'm going to go to work and I'm going to have to address this head on. And so I went to work and I made a deliberate effort to go make an appointment with my boss and tell him. And then I don't remember the timing, whether I came back from that and I told Cass. Cass and I sat in the same space. We worked in a security controlled environment, and we had other coworkers, and we were all very kind of constrained. And so I kind of remember, hey, this happened to me yesterday. And two things happened. I mentioned about being the leper, but you really know who your true friends are. And Cass is one of those. And I need to tell you, Cass, thank you. You were very encouraging to me. Cass did a couple of things right off the bat. He had his own grieving. He's like, what? How did this happen? This doesn't work. This doesn't make sense. And then, after lunch, later that afternoon, he came up to me when our other workers weren't around. And he was like, hey, man, this sucks. I need to tell you it sucks. I don't like it. I don't believe it. But I need to tell you that the Marine Corps made a mistake. You're better than this. And that was great. That was really important because for me and many of us, our ego, the good part of the ego, is tied to our job. And Colin Powell said, don't tie your ego to your job. When your job goes away, your ego shouldn't go with it. And so the good part of ego, Cass watered. He watered a little tiny plant that was wilting. And I appreciate that. And thank you.
Yeah, man.
And so, as did my wife, and as did Cass. And then over the next couple of weeks, your true friends come in, and they all have their own grieving process, by the way. It's not as significant as mine because I'm looking for a new job next year. But that's what good friends do, is they pull alongside you. And Cass did it in two parts. And I don't even know if it was on purpose, but the first part was, I'm with you. I don't believe this. You're better than this. And then the second part was equally important, was months later. We worked together for another year after this happened.
Yeah.
Months later, he comes up to me and he says, hey, man, how are you doing with this passed over thing months later? And have you given any thought to how it happened? and he gave me room to kind of vent and talk. And then after I did that, he said, well, what can you change about what happened? And I was like, okay, let's have a conversation. And so those two things, not on the same day. Hey man, I believe in you. And what'd you do to screw it up the first time? People asked me that in the same question, but those are two things that friends need to do. And so, Roscoe, coming to you to answer your question, I took about 36 hours to process by myself and with my wife. And then I spent about the next very painful 2 weeks processing over and over again as all the people at our work would come up to me, not at once on the first day, because that would have been easy, but randomly in the channel line, randomly right before a brief, right before we're talking to the combatant commander, the generals will all come down and ask. Everybody wanted to know. And so, for about a month, I had a continual process of grieving of this is going on. And that's why I came to my decision of I'm going to have a good attitude now and tomorrow. And the next time somebody asks me the same question for the 50th time, hey, I heard you got passed over. How come? What do you want me to say? I'm an idiot and I should never have been a Marine. I don't know. And so that was kind of a controlling emotion function for me. So Roscoe, that's kind of what I did. And I think you're very important. We can't skip through the grieving. I want to. I'm inclined to do that. We can't skip through the grieving. And then one of the things that helped me is that my true friends were also grieving, and I needed to help them. I needed to help Cass with his grieving. And so, you mentioned a little bit about the integrity. I know that one of the themes of your podcast is resilience, and we'll probably unpack that a little more. Resilience is important. And integrity is important. You heard me earlier talk about, the name on the front of the jersey as opposed to the name on the front of the back of the jersey. Sorry, my train of thought
that's okay.
It left. I'm standing there, my suitcases and.
Yeah, no. Well, I want to point out a few things, Mike, just because there's a lot of people that listen to our podcast that have had no exposure to the military. So what I'm going to tell you guys is. One of the when you go on a combatant staff like Mike and I were on, you see these guys everywhere. The terminal 05s or 06s who have been passed over and who are just nugging through. They don't give a crap about anything. They do really poor work. They're just there buying time to get to the 20-year point or whatever they need for their 3-year point for the retirement check, and then they're pulling chocks, right?
They're lame ducks and they know it. Yeah,
they're lame ducks in the military at that point, and you see them everywhere. Mike was so different than that when he got that news. Like, he just continued to, like I said, live in his values and his character and his integrity. And my guess is if you wouldn't have made that decision, Mike, the opportunities that were then opened up to you would not have come to fruition, because it was the fact that you showed the way that you did and that you showed up with the attitude that you have, even though it was a very difficult position to be in with getting the questions from people. I mean, who wants to talk about why, it's like, well, why'd you lose the game? Well,
why do you suck?
Yeah. Who wants to talk about why, hey dude, why do you suck that bad? And how can I prevent sucking that bad in the future? It's like, come on, man. And so,
yeah,
I think that was just, you were it was even inspirational, Mike, to a certain extent, to see you, show up and perform the way that you continue to. And I know that Colonel Albanese really appreciated it as well and saw it as well. Colonel Albanese was the colonel that we worked for at the time. But yeah, my hat's off to you in that respect, man. And I think that that's so important. And going back to the grieving process, one thing we've talked about is, dude, what happens when the dream dies, right? Because guess what? It does. Roscoe and I have talked about this a million times, right? You hit a certain point. If you're in the military, you hit a certain point where they give you a flag and then it's just over, man.
You got to hang them up,
you hang them up, and everybody does. Tom Brady does it, or, you're a young kid who maybe your goal was to be a college athlete or a professional athlete and you get injured or something like that. And now that dream is gone, right? Well, the first thing you have to do is give yourself an opportunity to grieve the loss of that dream. But the next thing you have to do is sit down and go, okay, well, if this is the end, then what was it about that I love so much? And how can I find something that allows me to continue to explore and to invest that part of myself into something, right? Because maybe it was just you really enjoyed being around team. Maybe it was just that team environment that you liked, and there's ways to get after that. And so, but going back to resiliency, so I would like to hear from you, Mike, like what is your how would you define resiliency? Like, how does resiliency work for you? Because that was obviously a very difficult situation that you had to work through. And then talk about too, how that all unfolded and then getting picked up the next time around, right? When you were really not even in the bottom 5%, you're probably more like bottom 2% because you got passed over the first time. So talk about resiliency and then give us a little insight into how all of that process unfurled itself.
Okay. Thank you. The thing about resilience is you need to invest in it before you need it. It's a lot like knowing how to swim. If you get thrown off the boat, you got to know how to swim. If you're drowning, you don't have time to learn it. And so resilience is a lot about character and what you put in. There's several definitions of resilience. The Mayo Clinic, says it's the ability to take punches and continue to roll and function. The Harvard Business Review says that there are three things that are important for resilience: a staunch acceptance of reality, a deep belief, often, buttressed by strong values that life is meaningful, and an uncanny ability to improvise. The dictionary gives us the definition of resilience as the ability to return to original form after being stretched or deformed. I incorporate all those into my definition. It's a process of enhancing your mental and physical, emotional toughness and fostering strong relationships prior to and in order to respond and regroup after an intense setback. So it's all the preparations and then using the preparations when you need to. In my situation, CAS and I had worked together and we had been friends before I got my setback news. And relationships are important in resilience. You have to individually do the work on your emotions and your physical and emotional and mental and spiritual strength. But at the same time, life is a team sport. And so not even knowing it, Cass and I working together, I had put enough in whatever tank you want to call it, that when I got kicked in the teeth, Cass was there to be able to provide a little bit of an uplift. It's easily demonstrated in the life with my wife and my kids. Over years, I've put enough in the tank that when I came home from bad news from work, they all gave me hugs and they all had stuff in there. And so that's a lot of what we have to do with kind of resilience is partly remember that there's a lot of hard work that you as an individual have to do. And a lot of that can be done before a bad day. A lot of it has to be done on the day of the bad day and the day after the bad day.
Yeah.
That I think was the resilience that I was able to show, is that when I got up the next day and said, I'm going to work and I'm going to face this head on, that's kind of the first start of resilience. And the thing about resilience is it doesn't expire. You heard in my voice, and perhaps you saw on the video, this happened to me a decade or more ago, 15 years ago. I mean, I left in 2011. Cass and I stopped working in 2011. So this is 13 years ago, 2014. We left in 2014. So this is 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I don't know. Math is hard. And, but
I could throw out so many Auburn jokes right now, but I'm just going to refrain
especially
from all that.
for Marines.
Fair point. I just need to tell you,
double whammy.
They're stereotypes because sometimes they're true. That's all I'm saying.
This is why we put warning labels on shit, right?
That's right.
That's right. And so to get to how that ended, after the first month or two.
Before you go down that road, Mike,
Yeah.
let me just ask you this, because I think one of the things that in the way that Roscoe and I define resiliency, because I think in some of those definitions in translation, it gets lost, because it's not just, resiliency isn't just going through something bad and getting out on the other side, right? Resiliency to me is going through something that's bad and then taking the lessons learned from it so that you can improve on the back end. There has to be an improvement, because if there is an improvement in that process, then guess what? You're probably setting yourself up to have the same thing happen down the road because you didn't get the lessons learned. You didn't gather the information you needed to. You didn't make the appropriate changes you needed to be successful in the face of something like that the next time. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely would agree with that. That resilience is a process, not an event. And part of that process I talked about before, but let me talk about after. You need to kind of examine what happened and what did I do that could contribute to happen, and what do I do so that doesn't happen again. Or if it happens again, it's not a surprise and it's not a life-altering event. All of us have bad days at work, but not all of those bad days turn into an existential crisis of this is my ego. So coming to that, Cass, the not good part of the story is that I did some reflection on how did this happen? Right? And I still don't know why I was in the top 95% apparently, and I didn't get selected. I've never understood the mechanics, but what I did do is I looked at what could I have caused to this. And we talked earlier about ego, and I realized in hindsight, painfully, I wish I had learned this before, but to Cass's point, it's been critical to me going forward. I really did believe my performance appraisals after 20 years in the Marine Corps, 22 years in the Marine Corps. Specifically, the 1st Battalion I commanded was in the invasion in Iraq. My battalion commander got relieved, and I was the tallest one standing. And so I was the battalion commander as a major. It's a lieutenant colonel's job, so one rank before. And I was in the 1st Marine Division, and I was a combat arms guy, and we did pretty well. And then we fast forward, and in the career, I get selected for a 2nd Battalion command. And this is it was a combat logistics battalion, and it was in the logistics side of the things. And there's kind of a joke between meat eaters and leaf eaters. And I instead didn't make that a joke. I had a problem with all the people who didn't see the world the way the 1st Marine Division does. And so what happened is the battalion was brand new. It was freshly created. 58 days after we were born, we were in combat in Afghanistan. And we were engaged about every other day. We had about 17 Purple Hearts. We had 12 awards for valor. The team did exceptionally well. I had a really good team, and I had experience of being a battalion commander in combat before. But in the workups, and then when I came back home, I allowed my prejudice that even though I am in this logistics community, I'm a combat arms guy. I'm a gunfighter. I've already done it. And I got sideways with my boss and all the senior leaders in my organization. And I felt that I was smarter than them. And I told myself, hey, you've done this before. You've led a battalion in combat. You're in the 1st Marine Division. These people don't know how it goes. And that may have been true, but that should not have been the basis of how I treated my boss, the staff supporting my boss's boss, and everybody who wasn't on my team. And one of the things that I learned is that I was arrogant. And when I went back after the fact, I got the performance appraisals that said I was arrogant, that said, he's good, but he's not my favorite. And then that caused some challenges with my personal relations. And I basically told my boss and my general and the staff in my actions over and over again that I was smarter than them and I had more experience than them. And they were getting in the way of me taking care of the Marines that I was responsible for. And that only came about after hard introspection of looking at it from getting passed over. And there's no upside. My introspection over years was I was arrogant. I was a little snot. I was not respectful to other people's opinions that were senior to me. I was trying to do it my way. I was thinking that I was the only one that was responsible for these 625 Marines. And in reality, we're all responsible. And so that was hard. I didn't like that answer. But I couldn't get away from it. As I tried to figure out what had I done to get passed over, I was arrogant, and I was not a team player. And it was everything, our team against the world, instead of, let me look and see at this from my boss's perspective. What does my boss need? Can I communicate a little bit more? How do I help my boss interact with his boss? And I didn't. I felt that everybody was ambushing me, and I picked a fight with everybody instead of being gentle and engaging and get along. And I tell you what, I didn't like that version of me. I've counseled people for doing that before. That's not, nobody wants to hear a podcast of, how Mike Jernigan was arrogant and not a good team player. But when you ask a difficult question, that's what I had to learn, is that I was not a good team player. I was focused on my own and our team, but I neglected to include my boss and his team and his boss and his team into part of my team.
Well, let's jump into something that I've said for a long time is I wrote it in my book. I wrote a whole chapter on my book, and it says life will continue to present you the opportunity to learn a lesson until you actually learn the lesson. And I think that this can go back into the resilience talk and everything that you were just saying, because we talk about, we've said before, you got to have resilient, you got to be resilient. And here's the definition of resilience and everything. Well, how do you do it? Like there is a method to building resilience, and it's doing hard shit. If you do hard shit, you're going to fail sometimes. And then you learn how to get through that to the next hard shit that you're going to do, whether it's training for a marathon, trying to lose a little bit of weight, trying to save for retirement, trying to make 06 in the Marine Corps. Eventually, life is going to present you the opportunity to learn some lessons by challenging you and giving you some hard shit to do. And if you've done enough hard shit in the past, you've built the resilience to be able to get through that and actually learn the lesson that life is trying to teach you. And one thing that we've said on here is, when you're talking about the ego and your arrogance, well, humility is the antidote to arrogance and ego. And maybe that's the lesson that life was trying to teach you in that moment. And good on you for having the self-awareness and self-inspection processes to debrief yourself for accountability, to go, you know what? I'm not a victim here. What can I learn from this? Instead of, why did this happen to me? How can I turn this into a good thing? What can this teach me? Do a little bit of that self-inspection shit that we talk about, CAS, and get down to the nitty-gritty of it. What can I control? Well, it turns out that my attitude 10 years ago towards my bosses and their processes may not have been great. And now I'm paying the price for that. So let me change that a little bit. Let me change my attitude moving forward. So everything that you just said ties in my big old knot analogy that I like to use. It all ties together to the crap that we talk about on this podcast. It's awesome.
Yeah. And I just want to piggyback on that, Roscoe, because we've been talking a lot about ego and when it's good and when it's bad, but in that situation where you're faced with that, Mike, right? If your ego's so big where you go, well, they're just wrong, it wasn't me. I don't care what they think about me or what they did on my performance reports. I'm just going to keep pushing forward because I know I'm right. Well, guess what, dude? You're not learning the lesson, right? And you could have done that. You could have been like, no, they were wrong. I know what I'm doing. I've got this. Forget that. They were stupid, right? But then you would have, again, life is going to continue to give you that obstacle until you figure out the lesson from it. So.
Yeah, you're right, guys.
So I want to shift gears just a little bit. I mean, we can come back to this. We can stay on it for a long time, but I'm super curious about life on the boat. Did you ever live on the boat?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was on the Bonhomme Richard.
I sat down with a Navy guy at work the other day, and for 50 minutes, my jaw was on the floor at some of the things that he was telling me about the conduct on the boat and the differences between officers and enlisted and some of the protocols and all that kind of stuff. Captain's mast. And did you ever make anybody walk the plank, or did you ever keel haul anybody?
So let me help you so that you sound a little bit more intelligent with your Navy friends.
I am from Alabama.
They're called ships. Ships.
I always thought they were boats.
Are small. And they're the submarines, because it's kind of a control. There's some kind of definition, But if you call them ships, everybody will think that they'll give you a pass for being from Alabama.
Okay, so from now on, it's going to be ships. All right, got it.
Yeah, except the submarine, which is a boat, and nobody knows
call
why.
them boats.
Shit, I love being on ship. I was on the USS Bonhomme Richard twice. It's an amphibious deck. It has a crew of about 4,000, and it carries about 1,200 Marines.
Holy
It
crap.
has an airport on the top floor of the ship where Harriers and Ospreys and helicopters can land. And then on the second floor from the top, it has a giant aircraft hangar. And then it has everything that a city would have, including a post office, including 4 chow halls, including a government, so to speak, including a logistics shop. And so I absolutely loved, as a Marine, being aboard a ship. There's something we talked earlier about kind of being on the team and how kind of all the Americans in the military kind of pull to help each other. There's no other place than that happens more than a ship, because your life is the guy next to you. He might be the guy that does the blinking signal lights so that they can communicate to the other ship so we don't crash into each other. Or his job is because he's a cook and, he's working 16 hours a day because, feeding 4,000 people takes a little bit of work. And so everybody's kind of all in on a ship.
It just fascinates me because, Cass and I are used to 13,000-foot runways and sunken sheets and ice cold beer at night. And the stories that he was telling me that came out of the boat did not sound like 13,000-foot runways and sunken sheets.
No, it's 4,000 foot long, and they try to get about a 3,900 foot runway out of that 4,000 feet.
Good
but
Lord,
there's some
man.
Fences on the end with giant nets. So
So were you ever on a plane that did a trap onto the boat then?
Yes, I have a trap. They used to have planes called the Commercial Onboard Delivery, the CODs. It's a little tiny propeller plane. And so I actually have one trap and one catapult launch, one cat launch, they call it. As I flew on the USS Theodore Roosevelt and was caught by the arresting cable, and you jerk in your seat, and then on the other end, after a couple of days, they turned us around, and just like dating myself, we had the old little Evel Knievel, motorcycle, and you had a little rubber band thing, and you could launch him. And that's what it is they have this giant catapult that's steam powered, and it will slam into you, and it will throw the plane, and then the little piece connecting it to the ship breaks, and you fly. And so it is kind of a miracle of modern technology that I just close my eyes every time it happens.
Yeah. No.
So I told you in the pregame that my father-in-law was yeah, right. My father-in-law was he was an F-18 guy in the Marines for 26 years. And so we get together and we start telling stories, and he's done some traps. And I don't know if he ever lived on the boat. I think he just kind of visited the boat, the ship. My bad. I am teachable, by the way. But night traps was something that he said he never got used to that kind of stuff. It just amazes me. And I think that's some things that maybe we take for granted. I got to go out to Lemoore not too long ago and do some training with the Navy and run some of their simulators and things. And that whole going to the ship and the CAG and all that stuff, it fascinates me and it blows my mind because it's so different than what we're used to.
Yeah. I tip my hat to any of the Navy and Marine Corps pilots that do that.
Yeah.
I tip my hat to you guys. But there is something difficult about the commute to work, that you have to spend so much time training to get back onto the ship and to get off the ship so that you can commute to work. That is something amazing.
That's crazy. Go ahead, Cass.
I was just gonna. I was curious, Mike, if there was ever a time. I mean, you had such a long and illustrious career. If there was ever a time in that career where you had to make a really difficult ethical decision, and what led you to, what did you use? What was it that you leaned into, and how you decided to handle or make that decision?
Yeah. That happens a lot to us. The bottom line up front is we usually know, the greater we, you, me, Roscoe, our listeners, we usually know what the right thing to do is. We just don't want to do it because we don't want the consequences. And as we could come up with a dozen, sitting around the heritage room, and these are the things that we kind of do with younger experienced people in the service is life's too short to make all those mistakes yourself. So let's learn from one that I did, or one that I didn't do that I learned from somebody else. I had one example is that I had a boss that was particularly difficult, and he was in Japan, and I was in Hawaii. And he came for his first command visit to kind of meet the team, and I had all of my subordinate commanders. We went to dinner, and one of my company commanders was a brilliant young woman, and she had gotten an award in valor in our previous combat deployment in Afghanistan. And she was well respected, and she was a good Marine. And she happened to be a company commander because I had to relieve a company commander, and I was short a captain. So she was one rank below all the other company commanders, and she was on the way to being my best company commander. And my boss came in and let's have a dinner with all of your key leaders. And at the dinner, very surprising to me, he made sexist comments to this young female Marine officer who worked for me. And so I had a little bit of an ethical decision of, do I let this ride, or do I let this go, or do I address this? And then what are the consequences? And so kind of while I was working through that in my mind, as everybody was kind of shocked around the dinner table that this guy kind of said something that's not appropriate, he doubled down, and he made kind of another comment, particular to her gender, and perhaps even particular to her age.
Did this dude outrank you?
Yes.
Okay.
He was my boss.
Well, that's going to be important in the story, I'm sure.
He was my boss.
Yeah,
that's important.
He was my boss. And so after, as soon as he got the second one, I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I tried to be very gentle, and I said, hey, sir, that's not appropriate. Let's not talk about that. Let's go to something else. And then, same boss, the story's a little bit out of order because this was the dinner. And so I was able to change the conversation. He was embarrassed. I did not want to embarrass him. But at the end of the day, I said, this is my team. I have 2 male, more senior company commanders and 1 female junior company commander, but they're my team. And 2 days when my boss leaves from his trip, this is my team, and I'm going to protect my team. And don't pick a fight with my team. And and the consequence of that was that, it came out in my performance appraisal. He marked me down. And I kind of knew that was likely to happen when I chose to step in and defend, my female teammate. And so the ethics of that was, in a flash of my mind, is, do I keep my mouth shut and let this ride because he's hurt her feelings? What is it to me? I'm the boss. She works for me. I'm not a woman. And then at the same time was, this isn't right. If he said it about one of my male company commanders, would I say it? Yes, it would be, this is, let's not do this in a professional setting. And Mike, there's going to be consequences if you do this. This all happens kind of in the flash of thinking. And I said, yes, but the consequences of me not doing it to protect my team are more significant to me than doing it and having consequences from my boss. And so it's kind of in that kind of quick thinking. I knew what the consequences are going to be. I didn't want to do it, but I think I had the integrity to say, this isn't right. And this is my team. And let's not do that here at dinner. And so, that's kind of my example of how you kind of know the right thing to do, but you don't want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And integrity is doing the right thing. One of the things that I've been reading, Admiral McRaven's book, The Hero Code. It's sitting on my desk right now.
That's a great one. I got a lot of notes in the margins on that one.
Yeah. Lessons learned from lives well lived. And that's what he talks about, as other people do, is making the harder right decision instead of the easy wrong decision. And, we come back to my experience walking in the hallways with all these people coming up going, how come you suck? Why did you not get promoted? And every single day I had to make an integrity decision to say, I don't know why I wasn't picked. Other people were more qualified than me. And then next week, I think I'm over that. And then there's somebody else I haven't seen. They're like, hey, man, I heard you got passed over. Ha ha. What's wrong with you? I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm working as hard as I can. And so every day, so integrity is kind of big things in a surprise, like my example of a dinner where a conversation shouldn't have happened, but also they're deliberate as you go through your life of, did you do what you say you're going to do? Did you, hold up your end of your commitment? And if you didn't, what did you do to make it right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that we talk about that a lot on the podcast, Mike, just so you know, we call it we say practice integrity, because you're not always going to get it right. Sometimes you are going to be too uncomfortable maybe to do the right thing, and that's going to be a miss, right? But what you need to do is you have to first have a little bit of self-awareness and self-inspection to know what your value system is. And then from there, once you understand what your personal values are, that's what allows you to practice integrity. Because then when it comes to those really difficult decisions, you can actually balance how you make those decisions to make sure that they're aligned with the values that you have, so that you're in congruence. And that's how you step forward into it.
I like that.
Yeah, we even went a step further. We did a whole episode on integrity, and then into how that transfers into your life and how do you practice that and all that. And I found this really cool quote from Tony Dungy that said, "Integrity's it's doing what's right versus what's convenient." And in your case, in your example, it would have been convenient to just sit there with your mouth shut, not rock the boat, focus on yourself and how if you did stand up to that guy or make a comment, what's this going to reflect on my performance report, and et cetera, versus doing the right thing, which is often the hard thing to do. And it goes back to what I was saying about building resilience, man. You got to do hard shit sometimes, and you got to make hard decisions. But we just did an episode not too long ago that'll be out before this one does. And it was about what matters and what doesn't matter. And I think that one of the things that matters in your life overall, the 80 years that you're on this earth or so, and one of those things is your character and what you're remembered for and your legacy. And if you leave a legacy of doing the right thing, oftentimes it's going to be difficult, and you may have to pay some sort of penalty for that. But at the end of the day, you can sleep good. You can look at yourself in the mirror and go, you know what? I was a good dude today. And that's something, I've been teaching my kids since they were old enough to hear it and understand it. Our saying in our house, I got all boys, and our saying in our house was, just be a good dude. And to define that, one of the things that I used to define that is, when you look yourself in the eyes at night, can you say, yeah, man, I did the right thing today? Maybe it wasn't the easy thing. Maybe it was a difficult decision. Maybe it was something where I had to really, gut check on my values a little bit, and I might pay a penalty for that a little bit down the road, but I can sleep easy tonight knowing that I did the right thing.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of it is the self-reflection of, somebody smarter than me that said that, integrity is one of the few things that nobody can take from you. They can't steal it. They can't, take it, but you can give it away. And so you have to decide every day not to give away your integrity.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. That's powerful. So, Mike, I got a question for you. So obviously we went through that stuff, the finding out that you hadn't got selected. Obviously there was opportunity that came after that, because you ended up making 06 and doing a lot of great things after the fact related to that. But talk to me about when you finally got out and the chief of staff thing, and how you created some opportunities around that. Because what we always are talking about on the podcast is, dude, you got to get outside of your comfort zone. You got to ask questions. You got to find mentors. You have to do and take the steps that are required in order for you to create opportunity for yourself. So walk us through that a little bit.
Okay. So for your listeners, the chief of staff job comes from Eisenhower when he was the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe in World War II. He had an enormous international staff, running the European theater, when the war was still in question. We didn't know the good guys were going to win. And it was so complex that he had to create an individual who could sit in meetings for him and be his voice, because he didn't have time to sit in all the meetings. And then when Eisenhower became president, he took that with him, the chief of staff, to the White House. And since then, every president of the United States has had a chief of staff. to kind of manage the staff and be a trusted agent for the boss. And in the military, the chief of staff is usually the number 2 or number 3 guy in an organization. Only commanding generals get chiefs of staff. So the boss is always a 1 through a 4-star general. And if it's a number 2 guy, it's because he's the next guy, the next senior boss. If he's a number 3 guy, it's because there's a deputy commander stuck in the middle. That's what the difference is. So you're in the top 3 of an organization. And chiefs of staff are far away and scary. I never wanted to go see the chief of staff, even when I was a colonel, and they were my peers. It's like, you don't go see the chief of staff, you know. And so what happened to me was I was in my last year of being in the Marine Corps, and I was the commanding officer of the Marine Corps Engineer School. And the assignment guy said, "Hey, you got a little bit of time left. We're going to send you over to the base, and you can." They rate 6 colonels. You'll be number 7. You'll be the extra guy. You'll do the parades. You'll do the school openings. You know, you'll do the boards. You'll do all of the kind of stuff so everybody else can do their job, and then you can concentrate on preparing to retire. It's like, that's cool, great, thanks. I had a good run. And then about a week later, the assignment guy calls me and he goes, "So what happened was," and that's never a good way to start a conversation. And he goes, "So what happened is they're not getting 7, they're getting 5, and you have to be the chief of staff." And that's how I found out I was going to be a chief of staff. And then so I said, okay. And like any good Marine or airman, you know, if you're sending me to a job I've never done before, let me get some training. Let me figure out how to do this. And it turns out there was no training available for chiefs of staff. And so I started making my own training package for my use and my eventual replacement. And I came across an organization called the Chief of Staff Association, and they have training. And so I participated in some of the training. And then I went to their certification program at Oxford University. And so I gave myself some training, and I built some training, and I found some training as a chief of staff. And then when I eventually did get out of the Marine Corps a little bit more than a year later, I continued my relationship with the Chief of Staff Association. And that led to a conversation with the CEO who said, "Hey, you know, we're doing this and this. Why don't you come on my team?" So now my job is that I am the director of the mentorship program for the Chief of Staff Association, because back in the day, I tried to find some training for chiefs of staff, and now I'm helping, ironically, train other chiefs of staff.
That's cool. When we talk about opportunities, we talk about, you know, sometimes it's a random encounter with a person that you didn't anticipate, or it's a door opening, or maybe even a door closing. In your case, it could have been a door closing. Let's rewind for a second and go, if you would have made 06 on the first look, would that opportunity have popped up for you? I think it's important for us to be hyper aware to things like that. And this is why I go back to don't be a victim. Instead, look at it for what it is. Like, okay, so I'm going to be in 05 for another year. And then you make 06. Okay, well, what opportunities does this present to me? Maybe aside from the fact, maybe if you made it on your first look, you end up being a commander of some sort, or go into a different unit. Instead, now you're put down a completely different path. And one of the unique things, or one of the critical things about the opportunities is, first of all, you have to recognize it. And then second of all, you have to be fearless enough to take it.
I agree. I agree. And I think that comes back to what you guys asked me at the very beginning of our time together today, is that I just tried to work as hard as I could, even as a colonel. It was, you could say it's easier as a lieutenant and you're an apprentice in your trade. But even as a professional experienced in my trade, I worked as hard as I could to in my first assignment as a colonel at Headquarters Marine Corps. Later when I went to U.S. Forces Japan, later as a commander of a school, later as a chief of staff, and today as working in a mentorship organization and a chief of staff organization, and even now in our podcast. I'm trying to work as hard as I can. I did a little bit of homework. I thought about some of the questions you guys asked me, and I think that's just a good model for people. We talk about integrity, we talk about resilience, we talk about overcoming adversity, we talk about opportunity, but a lot of times opportunity presents itself to lots of people, but it comes disguised as hard work, and they don't see it as an opportunity because they're unwilling to do the work. And so a lot of times you can make your own opportunities by just being available, by just working hard.
Yeah, well, one thing we talk about too, Mike, is you never know who's watching, right? So if you're just working hard, sometimes opportunity will be created because you don't recognize that somebody else is watching the work that you're doing. And in the back of their mind, they're waiting for that chance to give you an opportunity to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Seneca said that opportunity is the combination of luck or preparation and timing. And oftentimes that preparation comes down to the work that you put in and the effort that you put in and pursuing those things. And I know I have my own stories. Cass has his own stories of sometimes you got to grind. Sometimes you just have to do the hard work and you don't really know where it's going in the end. But lo and behold, here's a door that opens up. Me deciding to go to school when I was on active duty opened a door for me to go to OTS, and doing really hard or doing really good in OTS and being the number 2 graduate out of there opened up a door for me to go and fly Strike Eagles. And so it's just kind of this ripple effect. But you see the theme here, the Be One Change One theme is hard work and effort and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. I always use this analogy of just keep chopping wood, man. When you got nothing else to do, just keep chopping wood. And one day you're going to look over and you're going to see this nice big ass wood pile over here.
That's a very good Alabama analogy.
See, I'm bringing it back home, man.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, but I think it's not just the hard work. It's also the recognition. It's also the self-awareness, the understanding your values, and then practicing that integrity in them, because that's what's going to help you really make the good choices in life. And that's what's going to help you work through those adverse times and help you with the resiliency that you need to come out the other side better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all good stuff. Mike, what else you got, man? What else do you want to share with us and our listeners?
When they make the movie about me, make me 6 feet tall.
Yeah. All right.
make me a fighter pilot.
All right. So you know what? That's a good question. So when we make the Mike Jernigan hero movie, who plays Mike Jernigan?
Jason Cooper.
Oh, I don't know if that one will work. He's got a face for radio.
I do have a face for podcasting.
Yeah, guys, I appreciate your time today. Thanks for having me on. We covered a lot of stuff. It's kind of fun. We mentioned the Heritage Room earlier, and for your listeners, in the Marine Corps and the Navy, we have sea stories, and in the Air Force, we have Heritage Rooms where it is designed for conversations like this. That we get a cup of coffee, we get an adult beverage, we sit down after a hard day of work, or sometimes shorten a day's work, and so it's during the workday, and we have a conversation like this to be able to talk about lessons learned. That how did it go today? How did it go last week? How do we get better? And in some cases, Mike, how do you get better? You really punted this into the outfield, to mix metaphors. And that's what I love about your podcast, but certainly our shared military heritage is that we have a venue. You're providing a venue for your listeners to tag along and hear some of our jokes and hear some of our rivalry, but hopefully to reflect a little bit and go, that sounds a lot like me. I use different words and I didn't have that experience, but I'm a pharmacist and my job is XYZ, and some of the challenges that Roscoe and Cass and Mike have talked about, maybe it helps me to think about those.
Well, I think it's important too to, people listen to Cass and I talk and tell these stories, and we come at it from one perspective and one kind of unique point of view, both growing up in fighter communities. But when we bring guests in like yourself and you say the same things, you might use different words, but the themes are there.
Yeah.
And that would be the message that I would want to leave the listeners with on every interview that we do. We're looking for people who have shared stories that share the same messaging in life. And you know what, guys, life is hard. And sometimes it sucks. And sometimes you have to build these tools and these skills and have your toolbox filled up with the things to help you through those times. If you're a young man or woman listening to this podcast, go back and listen to what Mike was saying about in the very beginning when he was in ROTC or when he was in, a second lieutenant and a first lieutenant. It was hard work. And that was the one thing that he could control. And you can't always control what your bosses think about you, but you can control your actions. You can control your thoughts. You can control how you walk in your values, and all those things have permeated through this 31-year career to put you where you are today. So it always goes back to the same stuff.
Yeah, like you like to say, Roscoe, it's a big old, I was just going to say, like you like to say, Roscoe, it's a big old knot, man. It all comes back to these things, which is why we focus on them and we try to stress them, because I think, Mike, you would agree with us, if you could go back and tell your younger self some advice, it would be exactly what we've talked about today.
It would. It would be keep your ego in check, that you're healthy enough that you're a professional at whatever your trade is, but don't let your ego get big enough that it needs its own dump truck to come in behind you. That other people are important on the team, and other people's perspectives are important on the team. And then, the last thing I would go back and tell younger Mike is to not play poker with CAS.
Is CAS a good poker player?
I'm not going to say anything about that.
No, I'm getting east-west nods from both people. So I'm not a poker player. I don't know the first thing about it. So,
but I do appreciate you're providing a virtual friendship for all of your listeners. Roscoe, you and I are new friends. CAS and I are old friends. But by having us sit around a virtual table in a virtual heritage room, we're able to include others into our virtual friendship. And that's what I think is important, is that I said earlier that life's a team sport. And I've shared a little bit how CAS particularly helped me at a difficult time. And there's hundreds of people that have helped me at difficult times, to yesterday. And that's what we need. You need a team, pick a team, choose a team, be on the team, but be a teammate, help somebody else, but allow people into your life to allow them to help you, and I think that fits with your theme of how you're talking to people around the world. And so the three of us have had an experience where our difficulties are a lot louder, perhaps. They're a lot more violent, perhaps. Many times our consequences are indeed the ultimate consequence. And while we cannot replicate that, we can certainly explain that and allow people to make their own connections for their own world.
Yeah, it's very hard to put people in pressure situations like we were exposed to, but hopefully we can digest and dilute those lessons learned down to where we can share that with other people and maybe draw some lessons that apply to everyone. Not everybody's going to get to go 500 miles an hour with their hair on fire or be hiding behind a bunker getting shot at by the bad guy, which will make you reevaluate what you think is important in life for sure. But hey, speaking of the friendships and the community that we're trying to build here, are you active on any of the social medias? Do you have a platform where if people wanted to reach out and ask you questions, or maybe we can just have them go through us or anything like that? How can people reach out and get a hold of Mike?
Yeah. Send them through you. I don't have a website. I don't have a podcast. I have a LinkedIn profile because all of us need to get jobs in the future.
Yeah.
And the best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago, but the second best time is today. So you can find me on LinkedIn under my conveniently named Mike Jernigan. But I don't really have anything to advertise. I really appreciate it. I wish that I had a book. I wish that I had a website. And so maybe when you edit this out, you can make a really cool website for them to go to, and they can learn how to be an astronaut or something.
Yeah. Well, you have a great story to tell, and you have experience that you can share with other people. And that's what we like to do, is we like to take the lessons that the Air Force provided us and the experiences that the Air Force provided us just by being part of that. And hopefully, tell some cool guy stories here and there, and maybe some people gravitate towards that. CAS, what's up, man?
Nothing. I just want to say thanks for coming on, Mike. I appreciate you, brother.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's always great to see you, CAS, and I look forward to seeing you again, Roscoe. Thanks for letting me spend a little bit of time just thinking about some things and trying to explain some things that happened to me. But I appreciate the opportunity, and great to see you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. CAS, parting shots?
Be the change.
Be the one.
Hey guys, one of the consistent topics we discuss on the Be One Change One podcast is the importance of resiliency, seizing opportunities, and choosing courage over comfort to achieve what is important to you. So if you're an outdoorsman, we would encourage you to explore Sick Bear Outdoors.
That's right. Sick Bear believes in using the symbol of resilience to empower your outdoor adventures and to experience the wildness of life's trails. Sick Bear adopts the bear's approach by fearlessly embracing nature, standing your ground, and courageously facing challenges. Get out of your comfort zone at sickbear.com. That's SICBEAR.com. Visit sickbear.com for all of your individual and family hunting, fishing, or outdoor adventure needs. Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.be1change1.com. That's be and the number one, change and the number one.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be One Change One on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.